They said a woman with nothing left has nothing left to lose, but they were wrong. She still had her name to bury. The wind came sharp off the basin that spring of 1881, carrying with it the smell of sage and something older rot, maybe, or just the memory of it. The town of Prospect Bend sat low and mean against the hills, a collection of warped wood and false promises where men drank to forget and women worked to survive. It was the kind of place you rode through, not toward. But Marla Pruitt had nowhere left to ride. She stood at the edge of town with a canvas bag slung across her thin shoulder and dust caked into the folds of her black morning dress. The fabric had gone gray at the hems. Her boots were split at the seams. She was 34 years old and looked 50 in the hard light, her face carved lean by hunger and the kind of exhaustion that doesn't wash off. Her husband, Daniel, had been dead 3 months shot over a card, the game in a Tucson saloon, they'd told her. Shot over a debt, others whispered. Shot because he was a fool, most agreed. She didn't care why anymore. Dead was dead. What she cared about was the scrap of paper folded in her pocket, a deed signed in shaky ink by a man who'd owed Daniel money and paid it in property instead of coin. An old motel, he'd called it. Out past the edge of Prospect Bend, where the road bent toward nothing. Ain't much, he'd said, but it's yours. It was more than she had. Marla walked the 2 miles on foot, the sun climbing her back like a predator. Sweat ran cold beneath her dress. Her throat was dry as bone. She passed a few riders heading into town. None stopped, none spoke. A widow alone was trouble, or bad luck, or both. She'd learned that fast. The motel appeared like a mirage through the heat shimmer. It was a low, single-story structure made of sun-bleached adobe and splintered timber, sagging in the middle like a broken spine. 6 rooms total, their doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The sign out front had once read Dest's Inn, but now only the D and the S remained, the rest eaten by wind and time. The yard was dust and dead grass. A windmill stood motionless, its blades locked in place. There was a stable, empty, a well, dry. Marla stopped 50 feet out and stared. This was it. This was what Daniel's life had been worth. She thought about turning around, thought about walking into the basin and letting the heat take her. But then she saw the door to the last room on the end, room 6, and it was open just a crack, swaying slightly in the wind. Something about it pulled her forward. Her boots crunched over broken glass and scattered nails. She pushed the door wider with her fingertips, the hinges screaming. The air inside was thick and stale, tinged with copper and old smoke. The room was bare except for an iron bed frame with no mattress, a cracked mirror on the wall, and a pile of cloth in the corner. No, not cloth. It was a dress. A woman's dress, pale blue calico, torn and stained dark along the bodice. Next to it lay a leather belt, frayed and stiff. And carved into the wooden bed frame in jagged, desperate letters, "They called me liar. They called me witch." I was neither. Beneath it, smaller, shakier, "Forgive me, Mama." Marla's knees buckled. She caught herself against the door frame, her heart hammering. The dress looked small, a girl's dress, maybe 16, maybe younger. The stains weren't mud, they were blood. In the West, a woman's shame was carved deeper than any brand and remembered longer than any grave. Marla stumbled backward out of room 6, gasping for air that wouldn't come clean. Her boot caught on a loose board and she went down hard, palms scraping against sun-cracked wood. The taste of copper filled her mouth. She'd bitten her tongue. Easy now. A shadow fell across her. She looked up, squinting against the glare, and saw him, a man, tall and lean, standing between her and the burning sky. His hat was pulled low, brim frayed. His hands hung loose at his sides, scarred knuckles and dirt under the nails. He didn't move closer. "You all right?" His voice was gravel and smoke. Careful. Marla spat blood into the dust and pushed herself up on shaking arms. Who the hell are you? Name's Cade Farrow. Got a patch of land north of here. He nodded toward the motel. Saw you walking in. Figured someone ought to warn you. Warn me about what? Cade's jaw worked. He looked past her toward room 6, and something hard settled behind his eyes, something old and tired. About what happened here. Marla climbed to her feet, legs unsteady. Her dress was torn at the knee now, showing pale skin beneath. She didn't care. Then talk. He was quiet a long moment, weighing his words like ammunition. Finally, girl died in that room, 3 years back. Name was Eliza Kern. She was 17. The name landed heavy between them. How'd she die? They said she was a witch. Cade's voice went flat, empty. Said she cursed a man's cattle. Said she poisoned a well. Said she laid with the devil himself. He spat into the dirt. All lies. Then why? Because she was pretty and poor and didn't bow her head when the preacher's son came calling. Cade's hands curled into fists. Because she said no, and men like him don't hear that word. Marla felt something cold slide down her spine. What did they do to her? Dragged her here, stripped her, beat her till she couldn't stand. They tied a rope around her neck and made her wear a sign that said, Desievere. His voice cracked, just barely. Locked her in that room for 3 days. No food, no water. Said they were driving the devil out. The wind picked up, moaning through the broken shutters. On the 3rd day, she stopped screaming. Cade looked at Marla now, and his eyes were hollow. By the time someone opened that door, she was gone. Rope still around her throat. She'd carved those words into the bed with a nail she'd pried from the floor. Marla's stomach turned. She tasted bile. And nobody stopped it? A few tried. Cade's voice went quieter. Her mama stood in the street and begged. The blacksmith's wife brought food, but they turned her away. He stopped, swallowed hard. I was working a cattle drive 2 towns over. Didn't know till I got back. By then, she was buried in the hard ground past the ridge. No marker, no name. Jesus Christ. He wasn't here that day. Marla turned and looked back at room 6. The door swayed gently, a mouth opening and closing. She thought of the dress, the blood, the desperate carving. Forgive me, Mama. A girl apologizing for dying. Why are you telling me this? Her voice came out raw. Cade stepped closer, boots scuffing dust. Because folks in Prospect Bend don't talk about it. They pretend it never happened. And because. He hesitated, then pulled something from his coat pocket. A small wooden cross, crudely carved, tied with a strip of faded blue ribbon. Because I loved her, and I wasn't here to stop them. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Marla looked at this man, this stranger with grief in his hands, and recognized the shape of it. She'd carried that same weight since Daniel died. Different sin, same burden. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. Cade nodded once, throat working. He tucked the cross back into his coat. You planning to stay? Got nowhere else? Then you should know. They'll come for you too, eventually. Widow woman, no man, no protection. They'll call you something. Find a reason. His eyes met hers, steady and sad. That's how it works here. Marla's jaw tightened. She looked at the motel, at room 6, at the ghost of a girl who died screaming into silence. Then let them come. Some debts are paid in silence. Others demand a voice louder than the men who tried to bury it. Marla spent the first night in room 1, as far from room 6 as she could get. She lay on bare floorboards with her canvas bag as a pillow, listening to the motel creak and settle around her like old bones. The wind pushed through gaps in the walls, carrying whispers that might have been memory or might have been madness. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she rose stiff and aching. Her mouth tasted like copper and dust. She walked outside and found Cade sitting on the porch step, a tin cup in his hands, steam rising thin into the cold morning air. "You stayed," she said. "Seemed like the thing to do." He held out the cup. "Coffee. Ain't much, but it's hot." She took it. The metal burned her palms. She drank anyway, letting the bitterness scald her tongue. It tasted like survival. "Thank you." Cade stood, brushing dust from his trousers. He was older in the daylight, maybe 40, maybe more. His face was a map of hard years, a scar through his left eyebrow, lines carved deep around his mouth, a nose that had been broken and set crooked. But his eyes were kind in a way that looked like it hurt him. "You mean to fix this place up?" he asked. Marla looked at the sagging roof, the broken windows, the door to room 6 still hanging open like a wound. "I don't know what I mean to do." "Fair enough." Cade walked to his horse, a gray mare tied to the windmill. He pulled a coil of rope from his saddlebag and held it up. "Found this in the stable. You want it gone?" Marla's stomach clenched. She knew without asking it was the same kind of rope they'd used on Eliza. Thick hemp, frayed at the ends, stained dark in places. A tool made into a weapon made into a monument. "Burn it," she said. They built a fire in the yard, feeding it mesquite branches and dried grass until the flames stood tall and hungry. Cade threw the rope in without ceremony. It caught fast, black smoke rising, the stink of burning fiber filling the air. Marla watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. Something in her chest loosened, just slightly. "That's one," Cade said quietly. "One? One piece of her gone. There's more." He nodded toward room 6. "The belt, the dress, the bed frame with her words carved in. You leave those, and she stays trapped here. You understand?" Marla understood. She'd been trapped herself in Daniel's debts, in the town's whispers, in the black dress she couldn't afford to replace. Ghosts weren't just the dead. They were the stories people refused to let go. "I'll handle it," she said. But before she could move, the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the basin. 3 riders coming fast, dust plumes rising behind them. Marla's hand went instinctively to her hip, but she had no gun. Cade stepped in front of her, his body a wall. The riders pulled up hard, 20 feet out. The leader was a thick man in a black coat, his face red and sweating despite the morning cool. A silver star was pinned crooked to his chest. Sheriff, or something like it. The 2 men flanking him were younger, lean and mean, hands resting easy on their gun belts. "Cade Farrow," the sheriff said, voice loud and false friendly. "Didn't expect to see you out here. Didn't expect to be here, Bullock." The sheriff's eyes slid to Marla, and she felt them crawl over her like insects. "And who's this?" "Owner of the property," Cade said flatly. Bullock grinned, showing yellow teeth. "That so?" "Well now, ma'am, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. This land's under county review. Unpaid taxes, disputed claims. You can't just walk in and—" "I have the deed," Marla said. Her voice came out steady, harder than she felt. "Deed don't mean much if the land's got a lien on it." "There's no lien." Bullock's grin widened. "There is now." The 2 younger men laughed, low and ugly. Marla's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream, to spit, to claw that grin off his face. But she'd learned long ago that a woman's anger was just another excuse. Cade's voice cut through, cold as winter. "You're lying, Bullock. This land's clear. I checked the records myself last month. Did you now?" The sheriff leaned forward in his saddle, leather creaking. "And why would you do that?" "Because I knew someone would try this." A long silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Bullock's face darkened. "You calling me a thief?" "I'm saying leave the woman alone." "Or what?" Cade didn't answer. He just stood there, shoulders loose, hands empty, waiting. And something in his stillness made the 2 younger men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. Bullock spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." Yeah, Cade said quietly. It is. The sheriff yanked his reins hard, wheeling his horse. The three riders kicked up dust as they galloped back toward town, their shapes dissolving into heat shimmer. Marla let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They'll come back. Probably. Why did you do that? Cade looked at her, and for a moment she saw past the scars and the hard years to something raw underneath. Because nobody stood up for Eliza, and I won't make that mistake twice. Truth has a way of outlasting lies, especially when it's carved in a child's hand and witnessed by the silent earth. They worked through the heat of the day, Cade and Marla, pulling the motel back from the edge of collapse, one nail at a time. He brought tools from his ranch, a hammer, a saw, a box of nails salvaged from somewhere. She hauled water from the creek a half-mile south, her shoulders burning, blisters rising on her palms. By afternoon, the windmill was turning again, creaking but alive, pulling up water that ran rust-red at first, then clear. They didn't talk much. The work was language enough. When the sun dropped low and orange, Cade built another fire in the yard. Marla watched him move, efficient, practiced, a man who'd lived alone long enough to forget he was lonely. He heated beans in a tin pot and they ate in silence, the metal spoon scraping like whispered prayers. "Room 6, Marla said finally. "I need to go back in." Cade set his spoon down. "You sure?" "No." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "But it needs doing." He nodded slowly. "I'll come with you." They stood together at the threshold as the last light bled from the sky. The room felt colder now, heavier, as if it had been holding its breath. Marla stepped inside first, her shadow long across the floor. The dress was still there in the corner, the belt beside it, the bed frame with its desperate carving. They called me liar. They called me witch. I was neither. Forgive me, Mama. Marla knelt beside the dress, her knees pressing into grit and broken glass. Up close she could see the stitching, small, careful stitches, the kind a girl makes when she's trying to make something last. Blue calico with tiny white flowers. It had been pretty once. "We should bury it," she said. "Properly." "Where?" "Wherever she is." Cade's jaw tightened. "I know the place." They rode double on his gray mare, Marla sitting behind with the dress and belt wrapped in a clean flour sack. The moon was rising thin and white. The land stretched silver and black in all directions, endless and indifferent. They rode north, past Cade's small ranch house, past fields gone fallow, up into the hills where the ground turned hard and rocky. He stopped at a ridge overlooking the basin. Below them, Prospect Bend was a scatter of yellow lights, small and cold. "Here," Cade said. There was no marker, just hard earth and sage. He dismounted and helped Marla down, his hands careful on her waist. She felt the warmth of him through the fabric, brief and human. They stood side by side in the dark. "How do you know?" she asked. "I found her mama after. Woman named Ruth Kern. She told me where they'd put Eliza, made me swear I'd remember." His voice cracked. "She died 2 months later." "Grief," the doctor said. "But I think she just didn't want to live in a world that did that to her girl." Marla closed her eyes. 2 women, erased. No stones, no names, just dirt and silence and men's lies. "We're changing that," she said. They dug with Cade's knife in their bare hands, the earth stubborn and grudging. Marla's fingers bled. She didn't stop. When the hole was deep enough, she placed the dress and belt inside, folding them gently, the way a mother folds her child's clothes. Cade added the wooden cross he'd carried, the blue ribbon fluttering once before disappearing into shadow. They covered it together, pressing the earth down firm. "She deserves words," Marla said. Cade looked at her, uncertain. "I don't know any prayers." "Neither do I." Marla stood, wiping dirt on her dress. She looked down at the unmarked grave and spoke to the darkness and the dead girl beneath it. Your name was Eliza Kern. You were 17. You said no, and they killed you for it. But you're not forgotten, not anymore. Her voice carried across the ridge, strong and clear. I see you, I hear you, and I'm sorry. For a long moment there was only wind and stars. Then, from somewhere down the slope, a sound, footsteps, small and uneven. Marla's hand shot to Cade's arm. He tensed, reaching for the knife at his belt. A figure emerged from the sagebrush. A child, a girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a torn dress and no shoes. Her hair was tangled, her face smudged with dirt. She held something in her small fists, a stone, river smooth and white. She stopped 10 feet away, staring at them with dark, solemn eyes. You knew Eliza? The girl whispered. Cade crouched down slowly. I did. Did you? The girl nodded. Tears tracked clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. She was kind to me. When Mama died and Papa, she couldn't finish. Eliza gave me bread. She told me I was brave. What's your name? Marla asked gently. Abigail. Where's your papa now, Abigail? In town. Drinking. The girl's voice went flat. Dead. He'll be mean when he gets home. Marla and Cade exchanged a look, another ghost in the making. Abigail stepped forward and knelt at the grave. She placed the white stone carefully on the fresh-turned earth, pressing it down with both hands. So she has something, the child said. So people know. The stone gleamed in the moonlight, small but visible, a marker made of love and a child's defiance. Marla knelt beside her. You're brave too, Abigail. The girl looked up at her, and something old and tired lived behind those young eyes. Will you stay? At the motel? I will. Promise? Promise. Abigail nodded, satisfied. Then she turned and ran back into the dark, disappearing like smoke. Cade stood slowly. Christ. Marla stayed kneeling, staring at the white stone, one small act of remembering in a land built on forgetting. We're not done, she said. They say the West was built by men with guns and grit, but it was women with scars and seeds who made it worth remembering. Word spread the way wildfires do in dry country, fast, hungry, and impossible to contain. The widow at Dusk's End was fixing up the motel. The widow had help from Cade Farrow. The widow had stood over Eliza Kern's grave and spoken her name out loud where the whole basin could hear it. Within a week, Sheriff Bullock rode out again, this time with 6 men. They found Marla on the porch, a hammer in her hand and nails between her teeth, rehanging the door to room 3. She didn't stop working when they arrived. Ma'am, Bullock said, voice slick with false courtesy, we got complaints. Folks say you're disturbing the peace, spreading lies about decent citizens. Marla drove a nail home with 3 sharp strikes. I'm fixing a building. That disturb you? It's what you're saying that disturbs folks. I'm not saying anything. She turned to face him, hammer loose in her grip. But Eliza Kern is. Her name's carved into that bed frame, in room 6. Anyone who wants to see the truth can walk right in. Bullock's face went red. That girl was a what? Marla's voice cut like a blade. A liar? A witch? Say it. Say what you called her before you locked her in that room and let her die. The men behind Bullock shifted, uneasy. One of them was younger, barely 20, and he wouldn't meet Marla's eyes. You got no right, Bullock started. I got a deed and the truth. Which one scares you more? The sheriff's hand moved toward his gun. Marla didn't flinch. She'd stopped being afraid of men like him the day she buried Daniel. Death was just another kind of leaving, and she'd had practice. But before Bullock could draw, a voice rang out from the road. Touch her and I'll kill you where you sit. Cade stood 50 yards out, rifle raised, sighted, steady. His hat was gone. His face was stone. Behind him, impossibly, were others. The blacksmith's wife on foot, carrying a basket, an old Mexican rancher on a mule, a Navajo woman with gray braids and a walking stick, and Abigail, the small girl, holding the hand of another child, and another. 7 people, then 10, then more. They came slowly, deliberately, forming a line between the sheriff and the motel. Not an army, just witnesses, people who'd stayed silent once and wouldn't again. The blacksmith's wife spoke, her voice shaking but clear. "I brought Eliza food that last day. You turned me away, Bullock. You said she was getting what she deserved." The old rancher spat. "My daughter spoke against it. You called her a troublemaker. Ran her out of town." The Navajo woman stepped forward, her eyes like flint. "My son loved Eliza. You threatened to hang him too if he said her name." One by one they testified, not to a judge but to the earth and sky, and the truth came tumbling out like stones from a broken dam. The sheriff's face went from red to white. His men looked at each other, uncertain, suddenly outnumbered not by force but by memory. "This is," Bullock tried. "Done," Cade said. "It's done. Ride away." For a long moment no one moved. Then the young man behind Bullock pulled his horse aside, breaking formation. Then another. The sheriff sat alone, surrounded by his collapsing lies. "This town's going to hell," he muttered. "It was already there," Marla said. "We're just pulling it back." Bullock yanked his reins and rode hard toward Prospect Bend, dust rising behind him like a curse. 3 months later, the motel had a new sign, Eliza's Rest, hand-painted by Marla in white letters, visible from the road. Room 6 stood open now, swept clean, the bed frame removed and buried beside Eliza's grave. In its place, a small altar with candles and wildflowers, changed weekly by visitors who came from miles around, women, mostly, but men too. People who wanted to remember, people who needed to say they were sorry. Marla stood in the garden she'd planted in the yard, dirt under her nails, sweat on her brow, tomatoes and beans and squash, tough desert plants that didn't quit easy. Cade worked beside her, building a trellis from mesquite branches. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Abigail lived at the motel now, in room 2. Her father had ridden off one night and not come back drunk, probably, or dead. Either way, the girl stayed. She helped in the garden, swept the rooms, slept without nightmares for the first time in her short life. Other women came too. A widow from Silver Creek, a girl accused of theft who'd only been hungry, a Navajo mother with 2 children and no husband. Marla gave them rooms. Cade brought supplies. The blacksmith's wife brought bread. The garden grew. At night, Marla sat on the porch and watched the stars, a tin cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Sometimes she could still hear the wind through room 6, but it didn't sound like screaming anymore. It sounded like breathing. Cade sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You think she knows?" Marla asked quietly. "Eliza, you think she knows we remember?" "I think she does." He looked at the white stone visible on the ridge, catching moonlight. "I think she's free." Marla nodded. Her left wrist bore a scar now, a rope burn from hauling water those first hard weeks. She'd thought about hiding it. Then she decided it was proof not of shame but of survival. "What do we do now?" she asked. Cade smiled, rare and small. "We keep going." From inside room 2, Abigail's voice rose in a song, thin and sweet. The other women joined in, their voices braiding together, carrying across the basin. It wasn't a hymn. It was something older, simpler. A song about planting, about roots that go deep. Marla closed her eyes and listened. Years later, travelers on the road to Prospect Bend would see the garden at dusk's end and wonder. They'd see the women working there, the children playing, the smoke rising from the kitchen. They'd see the sign, Eliza's Rest. Some would stop, some would ask. And Marla, older now but unbroken, would tell them the story. Not all of it, just enough. She'd show them the white stone on the ridge. She'd let them see room 6, empty but not forgotten. She'd ask them a question. When they come for the women in your town, and they will come, what will you do? Will you watch in silence, or will you stand? Most didn't answer. But some did, and those who did stayed. The garden kept growing, the motel filled with ghosts made human again. And Eliza Kern's name, once buried, became a prayer spoken by those who refused to forget. Some debts are paid in blood, others are paid in blooming things, and names carved in stone, and women who plant gardens where dead girls once screamed. The choice, as always, is yours.